I'm Scott Egan, and you're listening to the Voice of Insurance podcast, produced in association with Advantage Go, now part of Sapiens. Release your underwriters to underwrite with the Sapiens Advantage Go underwriting workbench. Today's podcast with Scott Egan is a tour de force. I think there are various reasons for that. The first is that whereas when we first spoke in 2023, Scott was relatively new in the CEO role at SiriusPoint, and his strategy hasn't had time to bed in and take full effect. Now we were speaking after a year when the business had posted another set of consistently strong results, and any talk of a turnaround was clearly a question belonging to the past. Secondly, this was now the third time that Scott had been on the podcast, and his confidence and comfort in doing this kind of thing has grown. But third, and most importantly, this is a podcast that is completely forward-looking and optimistic in tone. Because SiriusPoint has rebuilt credibility and has demonstrated an ability to grow profitably, it now has more strategic options at its disposal than it did 3 years ago. What makes this such an engaging interview is the chance it provides to examine those strategic choices, particularly now that the market environment is becoming more challenging and competitive. Listening back, it's Scott's confidence and clarity of purpose that shine through in this encounter, and that's why I can highly recommend a listen for anyone looking for a route map through this transitioning market. Enjoy the podcast. Scott, welcome back to the Voice of Insurance.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here.
Oh, it's really nice to be in your office on a fresh spring morning.
Yeah, no. Listen, it's nice to be back in London. I've been on the road since we've done our full year results in many countries and cities, but there's something nice about coming home.
Must be quite nice doing a round of results after they've been so good.
It's certainly easier. It's certainly easier, I'll give you that. But look, the results were good and we were pleased with them. But I know we've spoken before, Mark. If you came into the company, I don't think anyone would say they're perfect. And therefore, we take a moment to reflect on a job well done, and then we focus on the areas that I think we can further improve.
Yeah, I remember the last time we spoke, we were talking about the sort of 1% marginal gains.
We were indeed, and we still are, I promise you.
You're never going to be quite satisfied, but you've got a big grin on your face, which is good.
No, well, look, I think we're making great progress, and I said that when we did 2025 results, and 1% is really a mindset. It's a mindset and a culture of marginal improvements, and really beyond that, it's also about saying that small things actually, when they added together, make a difference. And I think you could see that in our 2025 results, where no one thing in isolation stood out as a headline item, but 10 things that we achieved meant that we had a very good set of results.
You're making me think of Nigel Lawson, who was the Chancellor of the second half.
I remember him.
I mean, we all lived through it, but well, not all of us did. We have some people may be lucky enough to be young enough not to have lived through it. But I remember he was up in the House being quizzed on why was the deficit bigger than they thought it was going to be or something in the question time. And he said, well, it's just the small difference between two very, very large numbers. And I think sometimes in insurance, of course, when the numbers are actually very large, that 1%, it's a very big difference between a large profit and a very modest, meagre profit.
I would say our example of that here would be, and I think it would be the same for most insurance companies, is you obviously make a profit every year, but in compared to your reserves, it's a small number. And so small movements in reserves would be my Nigel Lawson equivalent.
Well, I suppose it's slightly humbling to think that just a couple of points on interest rates, which, we're lucky enough to move back into an era where we have more or less real interest rates, interest rates being slightly higher than inflation. The difference it's made to the industry's bottom line is humbling, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, back to my point, though, every line contributes. So small movements make a difference. And so, look, that's the mindset we have here. And I've said this to you before on a previous podcast. There's also a mindset here, which is no complacency. Just because you've been successful in one moment, 1 month, 1 year, does not give you a right to sit back,
declare victory,
light the Havana cigar and know it'll all come back. I'm afraid I'm too old, and I would say maybe wise, but many would disagree, but I'm certainly too old to know that that's the case.
I suppose the downside is always there, isn't it? It's there. It's there waiting for you.
And you have to understand that the world moves, and we're seeing that hugely in many levels at the moment. The insurance world moves, the macro world moves, and you have to move with it. And there's also competition. So all of those things are all happening every day. And if you fall asleep, I promise you go backwards.
Yeah, it's fall asleep, you may not wake up. So well done on those results. When we were talking last couple of years ago, would have been the last time you were on the show, we were talking about effectively cementing the turnaround. And I think there'd be no one looking at those results or that series of results now, that consistency of those results, would have any doubt that the turnaround is completely cemented. And so what's the plan now? It has to be right for my next trick. What's that now, Scott?
So look, again, within the company, we haven't talked turnaround now for quite a while. And
no,
when we
you're well beyond. And I suppose the thing
are.
is, of course, the thing about results is that it's all last year's stuff. And so you've all moved on, but you have to wait for the story eventually catches up with you.
Yeah, but in the US, quarterly reporting means you do get it pretty regularly. But we just don't talk about turnaround anymore. We haven't for a long time. Actually, what we're trying to create here is a brilliant business. And you can see, if you dissect our results, not only have we got good bottom line momentum, and obviously that's very important, but there are many other aspects of our P&L and other things that we've achieved in 25 that are important. So our top line has grown significantly and has grown consistently for the last 7 quarters. And so really simply, that means what we're doing, customers want to buy. And we shouldn't forget the simple economics of that. So good top line momentum, good quality of earnings momentum. In other words, if you take out some of the more volatile items like PYD and CAT, the rest has improved again year over year. That's important. That really matters. We term that quality of earnings. Obviously, our operating return on equity improved again for the 3rd consecutive year. And actually, 2 other things happened, one in 2025 and one just after. In 2025, we won 2 significant customer awards, which for us were emblematic that the turnaround was over, that we were beginning to get recognised for the sort of products and services that we provide. And I think those are important moments to just pause for a second and realise that you must be doing something right. And then obviously on the back of our 2025 results, we got an upgrade by Fitch, which we've been waiting for a long time. And no criticism of Fitch, just we've had a strong desire.
That's that backward-looking thing. The things have to catch up.
Yeah, they do. They do. And listen, I've got great respect for the rating agencies, and rightly, they've wanted to see that track record emerging. But for us, if you go back, perhaps even to our first podcast, which was probably 3 years ago, when things were a lot more serious here and we were in turnaround, if you remember, we were on A- negative outlook, and that's not a great place to be.
No, it's quite painful.
And so to have got to an upgrade by Fitch and customer awards, I think those are 2 emblematic things that sit alongside what I would call the kind of hard facts. And so that's sort of how we are looking back in 2025. And at our staff town hall a few weeks ago, we had a moment where we said, let's just take a moment, and we did. And then we said the next day, let's get the hammer down on 2026. And that's what we're doing.
So what's the plan now?
So look, more of the same. I think we're a business that's growing. We're a business that's improving their profitability. I think we really have got a DNA in the marketplace that is recognised for our expertise around our specialisms. And you'll have seen some of those messaging starting to come through our 2025 results. We actually did 2 very small acquisitions for the first time at the end of 2025 as well. And I think one of the industry commentators described that to me as going from defence to offence. And that felt quite a good description of it, very sporting, but it felt a good description of it. So look, I think we've got a business with good, strong earnings power, a strategy around underwriting that I think is understandable, respect amongst a lot of specialisms that we are engaged in. People want to come and work with us in those specialisms. And so, you know what, growing, making more money for our shareholders, having a good culture, are things that I think we can be rightly proud of and want to do more of.
And just after the results, you announced a bit of a reorganisation, restructuring of the way that the business is organised into different divisions and sort of amalgamation of different divisions. Run me through that.
Yeah, I think it's just a natural evolution. If I'm honest, we've already got 2 global businesses, or had 2 global businesses in global reinsurance and global A&H. I think really through heritage and history, we had a P&C business in London and Stockholm, and we had one in the US. And I think there was a natural evolution as the momentum gathered, particularly around our program business, that at some point we would bring that together. And it felt right after 3 years that we would have a more global approach to our program business. And so now we have 3 global P&Ls. We have global reinsurance, global A&H, and a global programs business. And I'm really excited about it. And then we have a 4th area, which is our London market specialty.
And I suppose London's sort of global anyway.
Of course. And actually, all of our global P&Ls use our London platforms. So the reason we wanted to sort of separate it and give it a different identity and something that I think is clear, which is a specialty business. One, because I think it really gives us a brand externally in that space. And actually, it's how our global P&Ls use what I think are unique platforms, particularly Lloyd's, that we have in London. So yeah, look, I think it's just a really natural evolution of our business, Mark, as we go into 2026. And I think it's one that people can understand. And I think it makes us easier to navigate for our customers and actually easier internally as well.
Yeah, well, I suppose it must be quite difficult to run a global business. You can say it, but then you have to have genuinely global systems. Someone waking up in New York has to know exactly what's been put down in London or in Stockholm or wherever, right?
Yeah. I mean, look, global is a big word, but I guess it really describes how we approach the market. What we don't want to do, we can have regional differences, but I think what we want to do is see that when people approach SiriusPoint, whether it be in London, whether it be in the US, whether it be in Europe, they get a consistent approach. And that's really what we're trying to reinforce, albeit, of course, you'll have regional differences in regulation and different bits and pieces, but really that's the message.
Reminds me, I was sitting in Madrid in the mid-90s, and I remember we used to correspond with a Norwegian broker, and he came and said, well, I want to do more Spanish business. And we said, great, and so what security is this? And Munich Re was the security. And so, but is that acceptable security? Yes, I think it is, but Munich Re already on all the business in Spain. I mean, obviously, I don't know if anybody in Munich knew anything about this at the time. And in fact, it's not fair, I'm not picking on Munich Re, but just that's how you ran a global business in the mid-90s. You probably ended up on all sorts of things via different channels you had no idea existed. And there's nothing like that today.
I promise you that's not the case here. And the thing that I would say I'm most proud of, and we've got a badge internally, I might have described it to you before, which is One SiriusPoint. We work very hard across our offices, our staff, our functions to stay joined up. We're not perfect, listen, and we don't have to sit in each other's shoulders.
Well, I mean, no two underwriters are quite the same, are they?
No, and I wouldn't want them to be. One of the things that I respect enormously is people have different perspectives on things. And so, look, I think what we're trying to do is embrace the local differences because markets are different, but make sure that we have a global approach to distribution and marketplaces. And I think that's really an important message.
Something about the London market, having that now as a totally unified unit. When we last spoke, you mentioned that you felt that you wanted it to grow into its skin. Are there specific words that you used?
I remember saying that, yeah.
Yes. It was a really interesting phrase. Do you think it has done that now?
I think it has in some respects, yes, which is I'm really pleased with the progress that we've made in our propositions. I'm really pleased with the progress that we've made in terms of the profitability of the business, which I think has really improved over the past few years. But I think if you look at it through the lens of scale, you would still say we're relatively small, particularly in the Lloyd's arena, and that's not the only platform in London, but it's a big platform. I would say that we are still relatively small compared to some of our competitors and peers. That said, Rome wasn't built in a day, and I'm sure you'll quote that one back to me in 2 years as well, but it's not. And if you look, in Lloyd's, for example, we've had our stamp capacity, I think, increased 5 or 6 times over that period, and we didn't start in a good place. So I think there just needs to be a realism, but we've got good momentum. I think the Lloyd's marketplace is a fantastic marketplace for specialty businesses, and that's why all of our global P&Ls use it, as well as our London office. So I think it still has some more skin to grow into, but actually what's also important is we do that really well, really thoughtfully, really carefully. Underwriting discipline is key, so it will never, ever be volume or scale for scale's sake. The day you do that, I'm afraid I definitely am old enough to have scars on my back and memories of that sort of stuff. But I think what I would say is we still have some space to grow.
Looking at the macro picture, obviously the last time we spoke was at Monte Carlo, and the conclusion there, obviously from the reinsurance community with your reinsurance hat on, would be that most reinsurers are pretty happy. They want to deploy more capital, and they were kind of happy. I mean, no one's ever quite happy to give away a bit of rate to get more of what they wanted. That certainly happened, and the softening happened a bit faster than everyone thought it was going to happen. That was a takeaway from all the broker reports at 1/1 would have been, wow, we gave away 2 years worth of softening in one go, which surprised a lot of people, but I don't see why it should surprise everyone, because you can't all grow at the same time without changing what you're looking at. How's it shaping your thinking right now?
Look, for us, reinsurance is obviously a smaller part of our business versus insurance.
But obviously, there's also softening the specialty side of things as well.
Let me talk about both sides. So I do think at times we use property cat as the poster child to every market, every product, every line.
It's easier for us journalists to measure.
Yeah, but I'm afraid it's a product and a market all on its own, and it's not.
Yeah, and it's only 30 billion or whatever.
Exactly. And for us, it's probably 5% of our premium, just to give you a sense. So there is no question that what you just described, I would agree with. And actually, because of that, we retained some customers, and from others, we moved on where we didn't think we were getting the rate or the reward, if you like, for the risk that we were taking. The great news here is that, back to my comment of double-digit growth for 7 quarters, we've got other areas that we can deploy our capital to, and that's business, isn't it? Just lifting it away from property cat. A business is about being able to deploy capital where you see opportunity. I think we can do that well, and we can do it at speed. Sometimes that's an attribute that businesses don't have. They can see an opportunity, but you can't get the money there quickly enough. Yeah. I think we can do that. We've built good vein structure. I feel like I'm making many body analogies here, but we've built a good vein structure that allows our money to flow around the group. So look, I think we can be agile. We can move our money around, but we are seeing good opportunity. So if you look at our growth profile in 2025, and it was in our investor deck that we presented, our 2 largest areas that we grew in were A&H and surety, which you might say have less correlation to some of the...
I'm sure they've got their own cycles, but they don't correlate.
No, they have, but they're different to some of the more traditional P&C.
And you can't just
trends.
turn up in the way that you could with property cat. If you want to write
deploy capital, you take the money and you move on type. Yeah. But so look, for us, what you can see in our growth is that we're agile in terms of where it comes from. The only thing I would comment, Mark, is that I think there's lots of generalisms as well. You get things like casualty. For me, casualty doesn't mean...
I'm old enough to have brokered business to casualty underwriters who wrote everything that wasn't property.
Yeah, no, well, look, casualty is made up of lots of different markets, products, and they all have different dynamics. So for us, what's at the heart of our strategy is that we will remain really disciplined, and I think you can see that in our results from some of the things that I've talked about. We have a great pipeline of opportunity. That's why things like the customer awards are so important, because we've got great opportunities, particularly coming through our MGA and program business, and we've got options, but we're not afraid to pull back where we don't feel like risk and reward are in equilibrium.
Yeah, because you've got all the platforms, you've got all the places where you can deploy capital. My takeaway from your results of where you were particularly pleased seemed to be US specialty. Would that be right?
Look, we're pleased everywhere. And I'm being serious, we are. And so I wouldn't over-index one over another. Yeah. I think the reason we highlighted that was because I think there is still a heritage, perhaps, around SiriusPoint, or a perception probably is the better word, around SiriusPoint, where we're seen as a Bermuda reinsurer. Yeah. And that's because that the 2 legacy companies that were part of...
And that's just not the fact anymore.
And it's not the fact. So the reason we were playing it is not to necessarily highlight A over B. It was more to sort of start to create the impression that SiriusPoint today is different.
Also, I'm sure in investor relations, US specialty businesses are attracting a higher valuation, Scott.
well, that is true. And therefore, my job, along with the team, is to make sure that people understand what our business is. I mean, look, put flippancy to one side for a second. Valuations will be what they will be. And companies who, I think, continue to deliver good returns consistently over time, I think, get rewarded. And for us, that's what we're focused on. What we're trying to do, given that our turnaround, to your earlier phrase, has happened in quite a short period of time, which it has, and therefore the business makeup has changed. When I came here, it was 75-25 or 70-30 the other way. Yeah. Reinsurance to insurance. Now it's the opposite. And so it's really important that we describe that, because otherwise people have to guess, and I'd rather they didn't guess.
Yes, obviously one of the other channels, that lifeblood of capital gets to flow down, is obviously you can give blood, you can give it back to the shareholders. There's been pretty significant share buybacks in the financial year. So is that illustrative of the way you see the market, that you can't deploy all the capital, one presumes, because some of it is not necessarily deployable? Is it a reflection of the risk reward, or is it you just want to reward the shareholders more?
Well, look, I've seen many across the marketplace, and I can't comment for others, but I can comment for us very specifically. So the way we thought about it was we had, beyond our operating results, we actually had some quite significant MGA disposals, part of a strategy you and I have talked about before on here, and that generated just under $400 million of liquidity. You would argue
so it was a special situation.
So for us, we took that money outside of what I would call the normal operating business, and we used around 200 million of it to retire some debt, and that took our leverage ratio to an all-time low. And obviously that had peaked when we purchased Chinaman Cheng shares. So we're now at an all-time low for our leverage. So we thought that was good use of that liquidity. We obviously made 2 small bolt-on acquisitions to one of our businesses, IMG, and therefore we felt it right that almost the remaining 100 million, we should return that to shareholders. We thought it was good economic use of that money, and we thought it was the right signal to send to our shareholders. But if you look at our capital ratio, Mark, you will see that our capital ratio is still relatively high, over 230% BSCR. You would argue that's a high capital ratio, and that's because we've got opportunities that we want to evaluate around growth and deploy that capital. And if we can't, then we'll evaluate options then. And really, those were the signals that we were trying to send at the end of 2025.
Yep. But where are you getting the best bang for your buck, do you feel, at the moment?
What, in terms of underwriting?
Yeah. But you already said you're happy in most places, but anywhere that you can really, really put your finger on it and say, right.
I would say every single business, so if you go back to the global P&Ls that I talked about, global A&H, reinsurance and programs, I would say in aggregate, I'm not unhappy with the aggregate result, particularly in any of them. But I know we can do better. But anyway, I'm not unhappy. But the key is when you get into those, there are always parts and segments. So A&H, we've talked about before, it's a very profitable business. It's a scale business for us, Mark. It's over $1 billion now of premium as we get into 2026. That's a significant A&H business. Is every part of it perfect? No, I think it's well documented that the employer stop loss market is tough, and we're in that. So that part of it is not as profitable as other parts, but in aggregate, we're happy and we manage things to a portfolio. I think if you look at reinsurance, we talked, of course, about property cat, and I told you that we've pulled back in places. Equally, there are other parts of our reinsurance business that we're very happy with and are performing well. And then you get into our programs and it becomes very program specific as well as geography specific as well as class specific, and some are doing incredibly well and some we need to push. Aviation would be a great example where I went on record at Q3. I don't think I was alone in saying that the aviation market needed rate, back to my sort of risk and reward. Fortunately, in Q4, which is a major renewal quarter, we managed to carry significant rate. So I think every business has different dynamics. In aggregate, I'm not unhappy with any of them. But as I say, our determination is to do better.
Before we move on, the last sort of macro question would be, is demand holding up in terms of things like business flow, in terms of deal flow, certainly submission flow, for example, into London? That's often a thing. We talk anecdotally about softening globally, starting with reinsurance, but also in specialty. And often the first real manifestation of that, you can see that there is not quite the deal flow, the submission flow coming through. Does that chime with your experience, or is it still holding up?
I would say not really, but that's partly because we've chosen an approach and a strategy. So if I break that down slightly, if you look at our program flow and funnel, which is what we call it internally, I would say it's full and we're evaluating many opportunities. The key for us is we are very, very, very selective about who we partner with. And listen, I don't want that to sound egotistical. I'm sure people do the same with us as well. But just to give you a sense in that space, we turn away around 90% of the opportunities that we see. That's a really important stat, and it's one that our investors pick up on as well, because what that tells you is, we look at the relationship, we look at the line, we look at the culture, we look at everything, underwriting philosophies, etc., and we make our decisions based on that. I think in reinsurance, things have definitely slowed up a bit, but really driven by rate. And we've been really selective about what we do and what we don't do. But we're also seeing opportunity, perhaps in some of the more structured products and stuff like that. And that market, I would say, is more dynamic at the moment in terms of finding pockets of opportunity. And then I would say our A&H business is probably more stable in that it's a lower inflationary, lower rate business in general. But I've already highlighted employer stop loss as something that is an area that we know we can improve. So I would say in aggregate, for us anyway, we're seeing good opportunity and good flow, and in our London business too, across all our areas. But we don't feel pressure to grow. I think for us, we will always put underwriting first. That's our philosophy. That's our approach. No regrets in that sense. So look, that's what we're seeing. That said, I think there will be opportunities for us to grow in 2026. And I guess the year will be what it will be, but I'm sure there'll be a few twists and turns along the way.
You mentioned about those disposals of those stakes you've got in a couple of MGAs there. Is that a process that's now done in terms of the rationalisation of some of those monetary stakes that you've got?
I think in terms of, from a materiality perspective, the answer is yes. So the ones that we really wanted out of quickly, the ones that were more material in terms of dollar,
Yeah.
I would say yes, done. And obviously we still own IMG, which is our A&H business, 100% ownership of that. And I've gone on record to say that's not for sale because it's a really
you
important...
said core, I think was the
Look,
words.
I'm not trying to be cryptic. It's part of our A&H ecosystem, and we gave some disclosure in our investor deck that I think really helped people understand that. Maybe we hadn't done that well enough before, but actually around a quarter of our A&H underwriting business, the premiums of that come from IMG. So you can see the interrelatedness and the importance of it. If you look by number of remaining MGA stakes, I would like it to be less. I think we still have sort of double digit, but not any of them are material in nature, with the exception of IMG, which I've talked to. And so I think that's just a natural process over time. For many of them, they will find different ownership, probably at refinancing points along their journey. And that's the time when we'll obviously look at some of these, but there's no pressure. We give full disclosure on it now. And whilst there might be still quite a few of them, in value terms, they're small.
Obviously, you're really known in the MGA space for supporting MGAs, and obviously you're getting to see most of them, or the ones you want to see. What's your assessment of where we are in terms of, we've been through this great flowering of MGA formation. It's been a really interesting time to be around, particularly the last 5 years. And, and obviously coinciding exactly with the podcast, actually, and the amount of people I've had on the podcast who are sort of hybrid carriers and some of the explosive growth that we've seen there has been really amazing. It's one of the most interesting things that's happened in the 20 years that I've been an insurance journalist. It's a really interesting trend. Anyway, what's your assessment of where we are in terms of MGA formation? I think some of my more recent conversations would be with people saying we're probably past peak formation. Or would you say that's premature?
So I've heard that line, right?
But you still get phone calls every day.
I'm not sure I know what peak formation really means. No, but let me explain why. So if you look over the last 10 years in both US and Europe, the MGA as a route to market has grown significantly, which is exactly the point that you're making. And here at SiriusPoint, we made a strategic decision to run towards that distribution channel as opposed to run away. But like every distribution channel, you have to be careful. I do think there's lots of stories and at times an oversimplification that somehow if you partner with MGAs and programs, it's volume only, it's bad. I don't agree with any of that. My comment back is, if you don't partner with MGAs, I'm not exactly looking at a set of companies who are delivering 30% ROEs and therefore you can see the difference. It's just a route to market and our customers have chosen that. And so we've run towards that. We're very careful, as I said before, about who we work with. We think the blend of our expertise and their expertise is something that can be a winning formula, and I think we're showing that. And for us, we don't see any let up in the opportunities that we are advising. But you can't keep growing the distribution channel at the growth rates of 3 years ago, 4 years ago. It has to naturally slow down. But we would say it's still a growing distribution channel.
We've been talking about IMG being a core business. On the culture side, you 100% own IMG. You've got underwriters working in there, but they're employees of IMG, which is a subsidiary company of your group. How do you make that experience for those underwriters who are SiriusPoint underwriters on SiriusPoint payroll versus IMG ones on the IMG payroll? How do you go about making that experience similar or identical? I suppose it can't be identical, can it?
No, it can. And let's talk about it at a business level. I think IMG benefits from being part of a larger group. And I think the two recent acquisitions show that that gives them a firepower that perhaps would be harder for them to have as an independent business. But I recognise, and I know my team recognise within the SiriusPoint group, that IMG is a different business. It's an MGA and other parts of the business are underwriting. And those are quite different dynamics just from a business perspective. And then within that, you have the sort of regional variations and differences. And one thing that we want to be respectful of is IMG has a heritage that it has grown up and through. And I think you shouldn't ride roughshod over that because something has been acquired along the way. And I've seen that, Mark, when I've been part of big insurers, and I won't name them, in the UK, where they've bought something up and down the value chain and almost had to make it part of the culture of the group. And I've seen it fail because of that. So our approach is to try and make sure it feels part of the family. And if you listen to my script and stuff from, if you have insomnia one night, from the investor call, you'll hear me welcoming them to the family. But that doesn't mean to say family members can't be different.
Yes, I suppose they've got a different role. And I suppose just because you're 100% owned doesn't mean you're 100% underwritten by SiriusPoint.
No. We actually have other capital providers as part of that business as well. And so I'm very actively involved with IMG. In fact, I was there last week and it was very cold and wet. And I was there last week and it was great to step into their world and their business. And actually, when I engage on IMG conversations, I mostly do it in their environment. And that's an interesting insight just in of itself, because it's almost, for me personally, maybe this is an insight into my leadership style, but it allows me to transition from what I would term core underwriter into a business that's different. And if you're in their environment with their people, with their culture, I find it easier to do that. So I have many trips actually to Indianapolis to help me do that.
Oh, that's really interesting. It's also, I mean, it's nice to hear, obviously you don't buy an MGA to then turn them into sort of standard balance sheet underwriters. But I
think that's a principle for any businesses. If you buy a business that's in a different part of the value chain, then I think you have to be very thoughtful and careful about what you want to do. It can't be completely independent either, because IMG would respect that they're part of a public group, and therefore there are things like some of the more formal things like reward, etc., that needs to form part of a sort of public group. But the last thing I'd want to do is shoehorn them into a culture that doesn't fit the business.
Obviously, the other thing that comes along with the softening of the marketplace, another thing that people can do with their capital, and you've done a bit yourself with these bolt-on acquisitions for IMG recently, is M&A. And we're seeing a lot of strategic M&A, consolidation type M&A going on within the peer group. Probably at risk of annoying you, I'd say that maybe when we first spoke 3 or 4 years ago, when you're on that A- precipice, which is not a very nice place to be, because if you fall over, it's quite a long way down to B+. It's not the same world, is it? But back then, if I was sitting back in the Insurance Insider editorial office and we're sort of sitting having a coffee going, what about, Scott Egan at SiriusPoint? What's his job? We would have said, well, the job is turn it around, fix it up, and then probably sell it on. We would have said that to ourselves. We said that's a perfectly valid narrative. But now, I think with this turnaround, well cemented turnaround, and being a business that's clearly got a strategy going forward and a future, would it be fair to say that we could put you in the frame now of being perhaps the acquirer rather than the acquired? What would you say to that, anyway, for one? And hopefully you'd take that as a compliment and not take it as being...
I think there's a really important principle. I promise you haven't annoyed me. Yeah. Although you made me wince slightly when you said the precipice, but I think it was a good description. So the great thing is you don't run businesses for inorganic reasons, whether it's being acquired or acquiring. And here we have a really clear, thoughtful, organic strategy. And truthfully, you can see that that's gained traction. So I promise you, every second of every day, that's what we're really focused on. And we think we've got a strategy that matters in the marketplace, matters with our customers, resonates with our staff. And ultimately, that's our job, to drive the business organically. I think if I look at us, and I keep coming back to the 2 small bolt-on acquisitions we've taken, I think where we can see an opportunity to accelerate our strategy, and I think that's a really important distinction for me. It's a phrase I use often, i.e. it's not acquiring for scale, or where we can see something that accelerates our strategy. I think we're now in a position, Mark, to do it because we're no longer in that precipice.
Yes.
I mean, there was no point having that conversation 2 or 3 years ago when we sat here, because it was about our survival at that point in time. So I feel immensely proud that we can now look at things. And the truth is, we do see things. In terms of whether someone looks at us and says, oh, honestly, our strategy is not geared around that.
That's not how you run a business.
And it's not how you run a business. But of course, we're a public company. And I'll say the same as every CEO said, we're a public company. And if it happened, we'd do whatever public companies do. And I've definitely been through that in my career. But organic is our number one focus. But if we see something, then we'll have a look and really challenge yourself. And I think we've got the capital flexibility, the debt flexibility, and also the market credibility now, which is a really actually important
This is the most
point.
important thing.
Yeah, for us to look at anything. And in terms of the wider market, which you alluded to, it's been quite frothy over the last 6 months or so. And look, I always read on acquisitions. Obviously, as we sit here, Zurich Beasley is one, but obviously you don't have to go back too
It's
far.
very clear that they've never run that business because this will be a lovely thing that they're going to sell on someone. They'll reluctantly make an offer they can't refuse.
But look, that's for them to decide, not me. I guess the theme of, is there consolidation? Yes, I think you and I will have seen that before as market cycles turn. I think that the M&A trend will continue. I still think there's a lot of assets out there privately owned as well as publicly traded. And the one thing about privately owned is eventually, particularly if they're in the private equity space, they have to make money. And so at some point, those assets will get moved on. And so I do think there will continue to be an M&A trend. Can't say for how long, can't say when it's going to happen, all that. But I think we're in a great position at SiriusPoint to take advantage if there's anything there that would accelerate our strategy.
Right, we can change the subject and talk about AI, because we almost certainly talked about it 2 years ago and probably 3 years ago, but it hasn't gone away. And I suppose it's getting some more interesting maturation phase now, because probably when we spoke 2 years ago, we'd said, well, we're just sort of starting on things where we're using it for this and that and the other, for turning unstructured data into structured data, looking at the low-hanging fruit. But now we're moving on. 2 years ago, it would have been okay to say, yeah, we're just trialing a few things. And now probably have trialed many things. Where have you had the most success, and where do you think we're going next?
I get slightly frustrated at the AI question because I almost feel...
Well, I feel like I have to keep asking it.
No, not you. I think in terms
it's not done now. It's never going to be done, is it?
There's this market environment where all of a sudden, and I'll probably get the date wrong, but 3 or 4 months ago, AI in the broker space came up as a topic. Wham!
I mean, to knock that much market capitalization off some very,
Personally, I really find it hard to get my head. Maybe I'm missing something, Mark, but I find it hard to get my head around that. So putting that to one side, I think the conversation that you and I had is AI an important strategic tool for any business? And I'm not talking about us at this point in time. The answer is yes, of course, because go back to my opening comments. If you don't and you fall asleep, you'll definitely go backwards. But I do view it as an evolutionary tool and not a revolutionary tool. Hence my comment around the broker space. Someone raises a topic and it's like the broker space is going to revolutionize. I just really struggle with that. But have I seen AI across our business improve things? Yes. Have I seen us make some mistakes and learnings and not everything is the way that you imagined it would be in terms of your deployment of it? Yes. I think the areas that we're really focused on are things like automation, things like data management, things like claims management. And I think we've got lots of examples of that where that's happening. Equally, just giving people AI tools on their desk is actually quite important. And there's risks to that as well as opportunities.
Yes.
And therefore you have to control it. You can't just sort of wade recklessly into that space. But we've now deployed tools on people's desk where they can use AI to help them do their job better. But ultimately, and maybe I'm just getting old-fashioned and old or something like that now, Mark, but I do feel that when you come to our business and you look at the type of risks we write, which are complex specialist risk, I know who I'll turn to for expertise, advice, and everything that they bring, and that's the underwriter. And that can be different when it's rules-based underwriting, personal lines, etc. But I think for the more complex end, the trick of AI is to use the tools to get the information to the underwriter in the best way possible, maximum information as quickly, etc. Then you can let them do their job. And so for us, what we're trying to do is look at speed and time. So one of the areas, to answer your question specifically, if you look at our program business, if you look at risks and opportunities, from the moment something happens, either a risk or an opportunity, to when that information gets passed through, then there's normally a little bit of arguing over the data, then it gets passed down, then it gets passed down to reserving, and then they argue a little bit as well. The elapsed time can be large. So we're deploying technology to say, if we want that to be shorter, how do we best deploy technology to do that? And how do we use AI tools to do that? All with the aim of getting the information to people's desks and desktops so that they can ultimately make better decisions.
So it's about productivity and efficiency rather than about trying to improve underwriting skill necessarily.
No, I wouldn't say it was just productivity and efficiency. I think that's part of it.
Yeah.
But I think it's about making sure that you're giving maximum richer information as quickly as you can to allow you to manage your business better. And that's not just productivity and efficiency.
So that's adding to the underwriting skill there.
Yes. I mean, look, like most businesses, I'm not going to sit here and say that we're really advanced. We're not, we're learning. But if I use the program space, we've been building pipe work between ourselves and our MGAs. You can tell I'm not a technical person, right? That's as sophisticated as I get. But we've been building pipe work that all of a sudden allows us to share underwriting data, policy data, claims data, and we've onboarded 10% of our programs onto that already. Our aim is to have more than 50% on by the end of the year. We're learning all the time as we go along. But think about that for a second. All of a sudden, you've got that level of information available immediately after a month end, as opposed to being a quarterly bordereau or something like that. All of a sudden, you've got much more real-time information, and you can deploy that straight away to people's desktops. They can then drill down very quickly if they spot something to either individual policy, individual claim. And I'm probably sounding like a nerd now, but I promise you that's the sort of stuff that I think really does change.
That's where you can really add value, can't you?
That's right. So I'm trying to not answer the question in a vague way, but that's evolution, not revolution. And maybe I'll be on here in 2 years' time and I'll eat my hat, but I promise you, I'm not seeing anything in terms of an industrial use case that would say that our industry is about to be revolutionized.
If that were the case, then the podcast wouldn't exist and neither you or I wouldn't exist. So probably having a drink down
and I'm sure there'd be some people that'd be happy at that mark and some people that would be sad, right? So to burst both their egos, there's two sides. Okay, one last thing, unscripted question on AI would be, it feels like every other insurtech at the moment is looking at AI as a risk in itself, as the peril of AI. At the moment, it's a silent peril that's included in liability business and in E&O and professional indemnity business because it's silently in there and not specifically excluded. Insurtechs, they're using AI to police AI, it seems to be. Anyway, that would be the methodology. But what's your thought about AI being a new standalone class of business? It's often sort of the efficacy of AI quite interesting as well. I don't think we're there yet, but it's a bit like cyber, isn't it? I mean, you don't have to go back too far to that not being a risk area that was sort of had to be evaluated. Look, AI is here to stay. So ultimately, over time, if there's a risk profile around AI, then I think as an industry, we've got a duty and an obligation to work with the world and our partners to make sure that we can evaluate and understand that risk. I'm not sure we've really got our head round what that really means and doesn't mean yet, Mark. But do I think it's an area that will develop and grow? Yes, I do, actually.
It's interesting because you wonder whether it will stay silent because it's so embedded in everything.
I don't think it will stay silent, but I think what you'll start to see is things will happen and therefore parts of that whole ecosystem will come up and people will start to risk protect as to how that then joins together.
It's going to be after a loss, isn't it?
Of course it is. It always is.
Well, we hadn't thought of that. And I didn't know you could get losses.
The greatest learning experience is always when people lose money, in our business.
Yes, and I suppose ultimately, who knows, regulators and very large reinsurers, if they all exclude it from everyone's treaty, then it is de facto going to become a standalone treaty.
But as I say, I think cyber is the great example of that. We can't bury our head in the sand, but I think there needs to be a recognition that as we learn, we have to protect ourselves. And that's why, as I say, I think the cyber case study is a good one where no one really was concerned about an individual risk. It was really the aggregation and what that could mean. And therefore, I think a recognition that we have to sort of be careful while we learn because you don't know what you don't know. But I think as an industry, if we put our head in the sand and said, no, we're just going to ignore it, we certainly won't do that here. And I think that would be wrong. Risks and the world changes and we have to change with it to be relevant.
Yeah, I mean, there's danger and there's opportunity.
Of course, we're a risk business.
Scott, I've really, really enjoyed chatting to you. It's good to see a big smile on your face. And, well, I suppose we need to book in for a couple of years' time if we're all still here.
Well, listen, I hope I'm still here. I'm not planning on going anywhere. But no, listen, as always, thank you. It's a great time here at SiriusPoint. Look, we feel like we've come a long way. And it's interesting when you do conversations like this because it makes you go back and go, oh, my goodness, that was 2 years ago. But we feel like we've come a long way. We feel like we've got a lot to be proud of. But honestly, Matt, the part I'm most proud of is the people that are here every single day who, honestly, I know I push them at times, but they've risen to that challenge and I couldn't be prouder of them. And so, honestly, people in the end is what drive businesses, and we've got great people here at SiriusPoint.
Thanks a lot, Scott.
Thank you very much.
Well, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, don't forget to subscribe or leave a like or a review or recommendation on whatever podcast platform you used to access this programme. These really help get the word out. Before we go, just a quick reminder that advertising slots are available here and in other places in the Voice of Insurance podcasts. Podcasting is the fastest growing medium and attracts a high quality audience of key decision makers. It's also an intimate medium where you, the listener, are right in the room with me and the interview subjects. Needless to say, that means it's a great way of getting your message out directly to an audience because you know you've got their full attention. It's also very cost effective. So get in touch with Mark at thevoiceofinsurance.com to find out how you could be speaking directly to the industry. The Voice of Insurance is produced in association with Advantage Go. Release your underwriters to underwrite with Advantage Go's underwriting platform. Voice of Insurance is produced by me, Mark Gagan. Music was written by Anna Gagan and produced by Carlos Gagan. Check out more podcasts and written comment pieces at www.thevoiceofinsurance.com.